Hello everyone, I hope you're having an excellent day. In this video, I wanna talk about integration testing. It's a very interesting topic. I think it's quite an important topic as well because I frankly adhere to the test-driven development method, and I think that if you haven't tested your code does not work at all. So that being said, we have different ways of testing application. You have unit tests, you have integration tests, you have end-to-end tests, and you probably have other ways of testing it. So for instance, integration tests can be either be done on the back end, where you simulate a front-end request with a super test, or it can be even in the front end. If you're using something like React, you can use Cypress and stuff like that. So in a nutshell, if we really want to dumb it down, unit test, you test individual units. So actually you would go and, for instance, you have a createTodo here, an updateTodo function in the to-do service. Well, if that function takes a dependency, for instance, a connection to the database or something, you will in a unit test mock that dependency. So create a fake class of that dependency and with fake values, and you will try to isolate just that logic here in your test and just test what is inside that unit, and that's it. That is unit testing. It seems that unit testing is the most common used test, but actually not really. Actually, in my experience working with startups and more into bootstrapping world, unit tests are actually quite rare because they take a lot of time. Why? Because you need to mock a lot of things, right? Most of the time your app will be kind of basically a CRUD app, right? It will connect to external services, it will call external APIs, it will connect to the database. So all those dependencies, you actually need to mock them. And some of them are quite hard to mock. If you're making a DApp, decentralized application, you will try to mock the blockchain, and that's not easy, to be honest. Also, I discovered that unit testing work very well when you have a project that spawns a lot of years. So you have a project that will last like 3-4 years and you have a big team. Unit testing are very good because they are very good at spotting bugs and errors and regression problems. So meaning you create a new functionality and you want to see how that functionality would affect old stuff. That unit testing would work very well. But for the most part, for the most software out there, if you do integration testing and end-to-end testing, that will be more than enough, because what I see most of the time is no test at all, like literally no test at all. So I want to point that out. So we have also, so I just talk about unit testing, we have integration testing. Integration testing is when you, from my perspective, is when you test several modules at the same time. So for instance, you want to test the createTodo, right? Well, in an integration test, I actually want that function to connect to the database, and I want it to use only what it needs to be to use for that test. So if I need to create a to-do, well, maybe the to-do will be linked to a user, so I need to create a user. I need to maybe inject some configuration files, and I want all that working together as an integration only for that. And when I'm testing the user module, I don't want the to-do test to interfere with the user module. So basically how it will happen in the real life, I will spawn a test database, I will run the test inside the to-do module, I will then start running the tests inside the user, and I will clean the database before doing so. So basically every module will clean the database and run the tests. So test on to-do run, database is cleaned, cool, we're happy. Then we go at the next one, test in user module run, we clean the database and stuff like that, right? By the way, if you want to learn more about unit testing, because I'm not going to talk about this in this video, there's an amazing video from Michael Guay, I hope I'm pronouncing the name right. I learned a lot watching that video, and he actually talks about the best practices about unit testing. So if you are interested about unit testing specifically, check that out. He talks about it in the context of NestJs, so quite cool. I will talk about integration testing and to a lesser extent about end-to-end testing. So integration testing, as we said, we combine several modules together to make sure that, like for instance, our createTodo or our updateTodo logic works. And as for end-to-end testing, so you get the whole picture, end-to-end testing will be more focused about the user journey. So for instance, the user comes to your app, user signs in, receives tokens, can reset passwords, can log out, can get his information, can perform various actions on the website, and you try to simulate the user journey through your app in a way. And there's an example here, app end-to-end spec. And usually in end-to-end tests, you will not try to test the logic, you will just try to test that, or the endpoints basically. You call an endpoint, you receive the right status code, and you receive the right answer in the body or stuff like that. This you will do in end-to-end tests. So okay, let's get started. I hope that introduction was clear and you got an idea about what the main testing methodologies are there. So let's go ahead and start writing some code, right? Okay guys, let's jump straight in. I'm going to try to make this screen as big as possible, but it also has a downside that it's very hard to navigate, so I might zoom in and out depending of where I am, okay? So we have a very simple project here. Let me go through the structure in general. As always, the source code of this project, it will be available in the description below, so feel free to download it and play around with it. So we have a simple app. So let's go ahead with Prisma, and we have a to-do, for instance, model. To-do model has a title, a description, a status, and it is linked to a user, right? A very important point, it has a onDelete set to cascade. So basically, if you delete the user from the database, all the to-dos related to that user will be deleted as well. This is quite important to set, because when we are going to reset the database before every test, we need to make sure that everything is deleted, otherwise we might have some problems, right? So we also have a user, pretty basic. It has a unique email field, first name, last name, and it has a relationship of to-dos. And the database is Postgres SQL, nothing fancy here. We are going to have two modules, actually three, Prisma, to-do, and user. And we're going to test the to-do and the user module. So the first thing with Prisma, stuff to notice, is that I'm extending Prisma clients, so I'm providing the URL to the database, and I have a cleaning function here called clean database. Basically, if the environment is not production, I get the names of all the models that are registered with Prisma, and I just run delete model on all of those. So basically, I delete the whole tables. So this is a function that we're going to run before the beginning of every integration test, if that makes sense. That being said, we also have a to-do service that has two functions, createTodo, updateTodo, and a user service that has nothing for in the meantime. And in the app module, we have a config module with its global set to true, and nothing fancy there, right? So one thing I would love to do is to already set up our test pipeline, so we can at least have some failing test. Also notice that Prisma has created a .env file with database URL. Since we are going to use a testing database, we will actually need two databases. Usually that's how I do, a devdb and a testdb. In this case, since the project is very small, I'm not going to use the devdb, but I'm going to leave it here to simulate a real workflow, and I'm just having a testdb, and this is a db that is going to be reset a lot and deleted a lot during our development journey, if that makes sense. So let's go ahead and create one test to try it out. So we go to do, and then usually the structure, it's taken from Michael Guay. I actually like how he did. So he created a test folder, and inside you have integration. And here I can say todo service int spec.ts. That's just a convention that I choose to name my spec file. And I just put a describe block to do service. I call it int for integration. And I need to provide one test at least. Let's put it to do, because Jest also has a to do functionality. That just means that this test will need to do. So should pass. Okay, that's it. So now let's go back to our config package.js. And here we will need to indicate to Jest that we want to execute that file. So let's go ahead here and set up some things. First of all, we will need to have a script to start and stop the database. So since we are using Docker, we can say create a script called db restart. So it will be docker compose down and docker compose up, right? Also, we want to sleep for 1 second, so we're sure that the database is created. It will depend of the speed of your computer. To be sure, you can set something like 2-3 seconds, but for me 1 second is fine. And then yeah, by the way, there are other ways of handling that, but for now it should do, of course. So then we're going to create the test script, so test int, to follow the test end-to-end pattern here, and it's going to be Jest. Several things we want to do. First of all, we want to execute the test in band, so one by one and not at the same time. The reason is that we will use one test database, and if we execute the test at the same time, well, a user might create a user here, and a to-do module might create another user with the same name, and that can create conflict. So we want to make sure that only one test runs at a time. It does not really bring the performance that down that much. It should be okay. So for that. Also, I want to have no cache. So if we change the file name or something, I don't want Jest to say me that this file name does not exist because it tries to get it from the cache. So no cache for me. Also, I want it to watch. So when I start the testing, I want just to watch and recompile every time I change the something in JavaScript or any file I choose to watch. And of course, I need to provide config. And in end-to-end test, there's a config inside test just end-to-end. Let's go ahead and check it out. And we can reuse the same config. I just want to put it in the root folder and call it just int for integration. And here I wanted to watch for int -spec. That's about it. So we can close everything and provide the path to that file. So it's just -in.json, right? So now we can save. I'm just going to create another hook, so a logic that I want to be executed before test in. So the way to do it in npm, so it's pre-test end, and I want to do yarn db restart, right? And let's go ahead and try already that. We also need to create the Prisma migration logic. So when we restart the database, we need to push the Prisma migration logic. But before that, let's go ahead and test already if we can start the test at all. So yarn test int. Okay, that seems working. I'm running it again. Everything seems to be working. So our two database, devdb and testdb, are running. Something that I noticed that we need to launch them in the background with D for daemon. And let's go ahead and do it. So the database are started and the tests have run. And we see that to-do service int, well, we have a to-do test here that is executed. So everything is fine you will see that we will soon get a bug. So, and it will be tied to absolute path. So let's go ahead and create the first module. So before all, we want to, let me close that for now. We want to create a test module. So module ref await test create testing module, and I'm going to import the app module. So I'm not going to worry about importing the modules I need. I just will import everything here. And we also need to compile the thing, right? And before actually running any tests, let's run the database reset logic. So prisma service, and we need to get that from the module ref get prisma service, and we run await prisma clean database. So we'll see what it will do right now. So you see that the first bug we have is that it says cannot find module in source app module. So there's a problem of how Jest imports the files. Let's fix that. So for that we need to go into our Jest configuration and add a field called module name wrapper, and basically we can delete that. Basically that will allow Jest to import the module from the source via a absolute path. So let's go ahead and reload the tests. And the next bug that we have is that, well, our Docker Compose is actually, our testDB is actually running on port 5432, but it is trying to get the port here. So if we modify that, that is going to run, and now it is complaining because it cannot find the model in the database, which makes sense because we haven't run any migrations. So let's kill that, and let's program the logic of migration. So when we are restarting the database, when we do db restart, the database is clean, there's nothing there, right? And by the way, here in that example, I'm restarting all the two databases, devdb and testdb. In production, or more importantly, in development, you want to just restart your own service and not all of them. Here, I just for the sake of it, I'm doing everything. And basically, after you restart, what we can do here, we can ask Prisma to do the migrations. Now, when I work in local development, so when I develop, I usually would have various development environments. I have the .env here, which will be mainly used for development, and I will want to have another environment variable, for instance, .env.test, that would connect to a test database, for instance. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to duplicate that environment, because I want to use only the end.test for the tests, and everything else I want to use for with the .env file, right? So for the test, it will be 432, and for the normal port, that will be 35 here. So basically, depending on the environment variables, our Prisma will connect to the devdb or to the testdb, right? Let's change that. It's not done, because basically when we run Prisma migrations, it will automatically get the .env file. So we need to tell it to actually get this one. For that, there's a package that we can use called .envcli, yarn add .envcli. We can add it as a development dependency. And basically here, before executing any Prisma logic, we can say .env e for the environment file .env.test, and then we can say the script, so Prisma migrate reset force. So that is going to reset our database and push our migrations. Let's try that out to see if that works. And I did a typo here, it's migrate, not migate. Okay, that's already cool. And the tests are running, and we still have some problems. Okay, so we have the bug because we're trying to push the migrations, but migrations don't exist yet. So that's the thing I forgot. We need to do yarn run prisma migrate dev, and we're just going to create the migrations without pushing them into the database. We're going to call it init, and now we should have the migrations. And now if we run the test, hopefully it is going to work. And cool, now it all works. So we managed to push the migrations to the database, and we managed to clean the database before running the test. So now we can go ahead and write our logic. We go to do, we go to test, integration test, and let's go ahead and run our logic. So the first test we are going to do is that we're going to check if we can create actually a to-do. So describe createTodo, and then we will have another one, update to do, right? And in here we should have AIT to do should create user and should create to do. So so the reason why we want to create the user first is because when we create the to-do, it needs a relationship of user. So just for testing the to-do creation, we actually need to have a user. This is where integration test will actually be very good, because we can just in that context create a user. So let's go ahead and create a user. Const user is equal to await prisma user create data. Here it's going to be email, well, test, let's call it John at skynet.com, and first name John, last name Connor. Right, we have our user, and we can actually save it, the user ID here, const user ID is equal user is equal number, and then when the user is created, user ID is equal to user.id. And then upon the creation of a to-do, here we need to actually call the service. So because this is the function we wanna test, so let to-do service, and here we do to-do service module ref get to-do service. And we call to-do service create to-do. Now the to-do service requires, and we need to program what it does require, and actually it should be let here. But every time we are going to test, change the files, test will run on our test database, and we will see in real time if our logic makes sense. So this is the cool thing, right? So this is a helper kind of function. We can close it. Now we need to create a to-do. Well, a create to-do will take what? It will take a user ID, and it will take a DTO. So it will take a title, description, and that's about it. So let's go ahead and create DTO. DTO here index.ts, and that will be createTodo.dto.ts. It's going to be a class, export class, createTodo DTO. It's going to have a title, which will be a string, and an optional description, which will be a string, description, right? And let's export it, export all from createTodo. We can close that window. And now we can say DTO, createTodo DTO. So it's going to expect those two things. So here, it's funny because it is supposed to throw yeah, it is throwing an error expecting two arguments. So the first is user ID that we have just saved. The second is the DTO. So we can just create it here. Const DTO createUser createTodo DTO. And it should have a title, first to do, and a description. Well, description can be first to do description. Let's just name it like that. And we pass it here as well. So that point test should be passing, and now we can write the logic. And the nice thing is that every time the database will be cleared, so every time we will run, we'll know for that run what will happen. I'm going to hide that to have more real estate, and let's go ahead and create a to-do. So to begin with, we need to return this prisma to-do create. Data would be user ID and then DTO, right? And we can say that, oh, it's going to return a promise of to-do. We need to import it from prisma. For some reason, it does import it from that. I want to import it from this. Sorry, I want to import it from @prisma client and not .prisma. Right? And since this title is unique, we also might want to catch that error that will appear. So let's go ahead and catch the error. So catch error if error instance of prisma client known error, right? If code stat if error dot code is equal p 202, it basically duplicate fields. Then we're going to throw a new forbidden exception. Duplicate to-do title, right? Otherwise, we just are going to throw the error, right? So all good here. Now we can go back here and actually verify that, well, that the to-do has been saved in the database. Although there's not a lot of sense to do that because the database is tested, so we can be sure that, well, it is working correctly. But for the sake of it, we can say expect to do the title to be DTO the title, and same for description, right? And also we can say that, well, status is equal to do status to open, right? So we save that, the tests are running, and everything is passing. Amazing, right? I'm not going to do update to do, but you can do it if you would like. This is wrong here. And the second thing I want to show is that how to handle several tests at the same time. So for instance, we are, and let me zoom out a bit because it's really small. So we have tested the createTodo function, right? We have created a user, and oops, why is it? It did that for some reason. Okay, so we have created a user, right, just for that to do, and then we have created a to do, and everything is working as correctly. So we can assume that this function works. This createTodo function works well, right? Well, not really, because we haven't tested the error, right? now let's go ahead and test the error. So I'm going to just copy, should throw on duplicate title. So we're going to create the to-do with the same thing, and here we can just say something like that: catch error, expect error dot status to be 4 or 3, and we can do that. And of course, if there's no error, we can say expect to do expect to do not to be undefined, right? So that way we can be sure that the tests are actually executed like they should. So here, if we're providing a duplicate title, well, we're going to catch that error thanks to our prisma function here, right? So that's it. We can be pretty much sure that we have tested this function, this create function, following the integration test. And you see that it's quite easy because we didn't need to like worry about mocking the database, mocking the user. We just have used what we have already, and it's quite clean because all those variables, all those entries in the database exist only for that test. And if we try to test the users, well, we're going to reset the database. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's say I want to have a function in the user service that is going to create a user. So createUser, and what are we going to say? Well, for the sake of it, let's just make it very quick because it already takes quite some time. Email string, first name string, and last name, right? And that is going to return this prisma user create data, email, first name, last name. And for the rest, it's going to be pretty much the same. If there's an error, we check if the error is a known error of prisma, client known request error, and if it is, we know that, and if the code is error.code is equal to P202, we know that it will be a duplicate email. Throw new forbidden exception, user already exists, and otherwise we just throw it in case we don't know what the error is, right? And so let's say we want to test that file, right? And we're going to stop the test here. We are going to do the same pattern, so test, and then is it tests or test? Okay, and then integration, and then inside we're going to put user.service dot int spec ts. We put describe user service int, and here we can literally copy the whole logic here before all, except that it's going to be a user service, right? And for the rest, yeah, user service and user service. And for the rest, we can just add all missing imports, right? And now we can test our createUser function. It should create user, right? And we just say await, await async await user service create user, well, John at skynet.com John Connor. Obviously, if you're reusing the same user information, you should abstract all that in a utils or data file that you can import from all the tests. So you don't need to like hard code it here. Yeah, that's about it. That should create a user. Let's save it in a variable, and let's say expect user dot, I don't know, email to be that email. And I'm just going to leave it here to not waste too much of your time, guys. And let's go ahead and run the test. And now it will actually detect it that we have two tests, and it will run them one by one. And every time before running a service, it will clean the database. So there's no conflict, even though we have created a user with the same email, right? So everything is passing here. And now we can check for duplicate, right? Should throw on duplicate email, and here we can say we can use this tactic. I used the promises chain in the other one. In this one, I can use try catch if you like. Usually, if the code is simple and more elegant and beautiful using promises chain, I try to use promises chain. Otherwise, if it makes more sense, I use try catch, right? So we have that, and then expect error dot status to be 4 or 3, if I'm not mistaken. And here we go. All our tests have passed. Here, if you want to just execute that test, let's say you have a lot of tests and they take quite some time, right? And here we are just working on user functionality. You don't want to test like 15 other services and controllers with integration tests, because that takes quite some time. So what you can do is that you can press W, and you can press P to filter by file name. And now you type, well, I want to test user.service, so user.service, and it will just test that, and it will not care about any other test. So that's about it, folks. This is how I do integration testing. I hope you liked my way. I think it's quite easy, quite nice, and it has this immediate feedback, right? Now, later on, we can have a tutorial about end-to-end testing exactly, but I think those are quite covered in the documentation of NestJs. Integration tests, I think they are not very covered, and you see, end-to-end tests for me should be quite easy. Like, it should be really simple. There should not be a lot of logic. That should just check for the status basically, and maybe the response, but that should not check that, I don't know, like the values are created in the database and stuff like that, right? So yeah, if you like this video, leave a like, subscribe to this channel if you haven't. I will keep posting videos about NestJs. It's really a framework that I love a lot. It makes my life easier, and I hope to share everything I know on the subject. So see you later in the next video, guys.